The freezing mud soaked right through her thin, torn clothes. Every gust of wind felt like 1,000 tiny needles piercing her skin. But the hotel manager didn't care at all. He just laughed a cruel, hollow laugh as he ripped the golden silk blanket right out of her trembling hands. He kicked her injured leg with the steel toe of his heavy leather boot. The impact sent her sprawling backward into the freezing, filthy slush. He stood there in his expensive, custom-tailored suit, looking down at her like she was absolute trash. He mocked her silence, knowing full well she was born without the ability to speak. He mocked her twisted spine and her heavy limp. He told her she was too ugly and too broken to even be seen by the paying guests. He thought he was just taking a nice warm blanket from a worthless, crippled maid. He thought he could use it to play the hero. He wanted to impress the wealthy elites who were currently trapped inside the lobby by the worst blizzard of the decade. But this arrogant manager had no idea what he was actually holding in his greedy hands. He didn't know that the organic golden silk he just stole was woven with an exclusive, highly advanced thermal bio pattern. And he certainly didn't know that the supreme billionaire who owned the patent for that exact pattern was standing right behind him in the snow. That billionaire wasn't just a guest complaining about the cold. He was desperately searching for his missing daughter in the middle of a deadly avalanche. Every single act of shared warmth and brave sacrifice can push back the darkest, coldest cruelty of this world. Hit that subscribe button right now to warm up your life with more stories of hope and justice. Mary never had an easy day in her entire life. She was left on the frozen steps of an orphanage as a baby. She was discarded simply because she wasn't perfect. She had a slight hunch in her back and a limp that made every single step a painful, exhausting battle. Her hands constantly trembled, a nervous tic from years of being terrified of the dark and the loud, violent storms in the mountains. But those hands never stopped working. She lived in a cramped, drafty, freezing attic right above the hotel's industrial laundry room. The ceiling leaked and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls every night, while the wealthy guests slept in their heated, luxurious suites. Mary was wide awake. She spent hours painstakingly weaving those golden thermal blankets from discarded silk scraps she found in the trash. She didn't sell them for profit. She gave them away completely for free to the homeless rock miners down in the frozen valley. She knew exactly what it was like to be freezing and forgotten by the rest of the world. She also knew she had a massive weight on her shoulders. Her adoptive father, the old miner who took her in when she had nowhere else to go, was dying. His lungs were completely destroyed by severe black lung disease from decades in the stone quarry. He needed expensive oxygen treatments just to make it through the night. Mary was his only hope to stay alive. He had always taught her to be unafraid of failure. He told her that the only real failure is giving up when things get hard. Mary was an incredibly fast learner. She had picked up the complex thermal weaving technique just by watching him do it once before his hands got too weak. She promised him she would never let the people in the valley freeze. She was a woman who always did what she said she would do. But the hotel manager made her life a living, breathing hell. He constantly shorted her paycheck, claiming she was too slow to earn a full wage. He forced her to work double shifts, scrubbing the frozen entrance steps without extra pay. He threatened her with illegal fabricated debts, claiming she owed the hotel for the moldy bread she ate He insulted her physical disabilities every single day in front of the other staff just to get a sick laugh. He called her a broken, worthless creature who should be grateful. He even let her breathe his air. If you believe that the flame of honest, brave devotion can warm up the coldest winter of human apathy, let us know. Drop this exact phrase in the comments below right now. I believe the warmth of human kindness, regardless of poverty, is always the lighthouse that saves lonely souls in the storm. Then the storm finally hit its breaking point. It wasn't just a blizzard anymore. It was a massive avalanche of ice, rock, and roaring wind that crashed down the mountainside. The hotel's main power grid blew out in seconds, plunging the entire luxury resort into absolute darkness. Panic erupted in the lobby as millionaires started screaming and pushing each other. But outside, the situation turned instantly deadly. Edward, the billionaire founder of a global rescue cabin network and the Royal Organic Textile Group, was staying at the resort. He was a single father traveling with his little girl to try and heal her. She suffered from severe trauma. After losing her mother in a car accident, she hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years, trapped in her own silent, deeply depressed world. In the absolute chaos and darkness of the blackout, the little girl got terrified. She wandered away from her father and slipped out the broken side doors of the lobby. In an instant, she was swallowed by the blinding, freezing whiteout of the storm. Edward was frantic, screaming her name into the roaring wind. He tried to organize search parties with the security guards, but the wind was too strong and the snow was too deep. Nobody could see past their own hands. The guards refused to go out, saying it was a suicide mission. Mary was still outside, bleeding in the snow from where the manager had pushed her. Her bad leg was throbbing in pure agony, completely numb from the cold. But through the howling wind, she saw the little shadow of the girl wander off into the death zone. Mary didn't hesitate for a single second. She dragged her broken body through the rising snowdrifts. She crawled on her hands and knees when her bad leg finally gave out completely. The freezing mud and jagged ice tore at her fingernails, making them bleed into the snow. The wind screamed in her ears, triggering her deep, paralyzing fear of storms. But she forced herself to keep moving. She finally found the little girl curled up under a snow-covered log, completely unresponsive. Her lips were turning blue, and her heartbeat was fading incredibly fast. Mary pulled the freezing child into her arms, using her own body as a human shield against the howling wind. She pulled out the absolute last thermal blanket she had hidden inside her torn coat. She wrapped it tightly around the little girl, tucking the edges to trap the body heat, just like her father taught her. With her shaking hands, she managed to light a small, cheap emergency burner. She heated up a battered thermos of potato soup she had saved for her dinner. She fed the girl drop by drop, humming a soft, wordless lullaby to calm her down. High above, Edward was up in a rescue helicopter fighting the heavy crosswinds. He was desperately scanning the ground with a military-grade thermal camera. He saw the manager huddled safely inside his heated office, doing absolutely nothing to help anyone but himself. But then he saw a faint heat signature out in the deadly storm. He saw a limping, crippled figure risking her own life. She was pouring every ounce of her warmth into saving his little girl. The helicopter blades cut through the storm, landing just a few yards away in the deep snow. Edward jumped out into the freezing whiteout, followed closely by his private medical team, and suddenly, the cowardly hotel manager found his courage. Seeing the supreme billionaire arrive, the manager rushed out of his warm, perfectly safe office. He ran straight toward the snowbank where Mary was holding a little girl. He roughly shoved Mary out of the way without a second thought. Mary fell backward into the jagged ice, gasping in pain as her injured leg twisted beneath her. The manager didn't even look down at her. He scooped up the little girl, wrapping the golden silk blanket tighter around her small shoulders. He carried her toward Edward, panting heavily and pretending to be completely exhausted from the rescue. "Mr. Edward, thank God you are here," the manager yelled over the roaring wind. "I searched everywhere for her in the dark. I braved the avalanche the second I realized she was missing from the lobby. I even brought one of our premium hotel blankets to keep her warm out here. I saved her, sir." Edward ran forward, warm tears streaming down his freezing face. He reached out to take his daughter, his heart pounding out of his chest. The manager smiled, already calculating the massive financial reward he was going to demand. He thought he had just secured his promotion to regional director of the entire resort chain. He thought he had completely buried the worthless, crippled Maid in the snow forever. But the manager had made one massive, fatal miscalculation. He didn't realize that the little girl wasn't just cold and tired, she was deeply traumatized. But she was incredibly observant and fiercely loyal. As soon as she was safely in her father's arms, the little girl started thrashing wildly. She violently pushed the manager away, a look of pure terror and disgust on her face. She pointed frantically back at the dark snowbank. She pointed right at Mary, who was struggling to sit up in the freezing mud. The little girl then grabbed the edge of the golden silk blanket. She didn't point to the embroidered hotel logo. She pointed to a very specific, deliberate knot woven into the bottom corner of the fabric. Edward's eyes went wide with absolute shock. He was the supreme chairman of the Royal Organic Textile Group. He had spent his entire life studying thermodynamics and advanced ancient weaving techniques. He immediately recognized the strange knot. It was a biothermal locking stitch. It was a legendary, incredibly complex technique that trapped human body heat at an unprecedented rate. It was a technique that no factory machine on earth could ever replicate. It had to be done entirely by hand, by someone with a terrifying level of skill and patience. Edward looked back at the manager, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet whisper. "You said this is a premium hotel blanket?" "Yes, of course, sir. Only the best quality for your family," the manager lied smoothly. Edward held up the corner of the golden silk directly in the manager's face. "Then tell me, what is the thermal retention capacity of this specific bio-stitch?" The manager completely froze. "The what, sir?" "The bio-stitch," Edward repeated, stepping closer and backing the manager up. "If you brought this blanket from your inventory, you should know its exact synthetic threshold." The manager started sweating profusely despite the freezing blizzard. "Well, sir, you know how these foreign manufacturers are. They use all sorts of technical jargon." Edward's eyes turned as cold as the ice under their feet. He looked past the stuttering manager and walked straight over to Mary. Mary was shaking violently, her hands bleeding and raw. But she looked up at him with quiet, unshakable dignity. Edward knelt down in the freezing mud, completely ruining his expensive designer suit. He took Mary's freezing, trembling hands in his own warm palms. He saw the heavy calluses on her fingers. He saw the fresh, microscopic cuts from working with raw, unforgiving silk threads. He saw the exact same golden thread tangled around her bruised wrists, the gentle, brave devotion of a crippled maid in the middle of a deadly storm had warmed the frozen heart of a single, grieving father. If you believe that the warmth of human kindness is the lighthouse that saves lonely souls, leave a comment right now. Write down, "I believe the warmth of human kindness, regardless of poverty, is always the lighthouse that saves lonely souls in the storm." Edward stood up, pulling Mary to her feet with the utmost respect. He turned to his head of corporate security, checked the thermal imaging logs from the rescue helicopter immediately. Edward commanded. The security chief pulled up a rugged tablet and played the video. The infrared recording showed exactly what had happened during the blackout. It showed the manager hiding under his desk in his heated office, doing absolutely nothing. It showed Mary dragging her broken body through the rising snowdrifts. It showed Mary using her own body heat to save the dying child. The manager's face turned completely pale, all the blood draining from his cheeks. "Sir, you have to understand, she is just a dirty, disabled maid," he stammered, stepping backward in terror. "She is a thief who probably stole that silk from the hotel trash. I was going to have my men bulldoze her illegal weaving shack tomorrow anyway." Edward didn't yell. He didn't need to raise his voice at all. The absolute terrifying power radiating from him was enough to crush the manager's soul. "You are fired," Edward said, his voice echoing sharply over the howling wind. "But losing your pathetic job is the absolute least of your problems tonight. You abandoned a helpless child in a deadly blizzard to save your own skin. You physically assaulted the brave woman who actually saved her, and you have systematically exploited a disabled worker under my roof." Edward signaled to the local mountain police, who had just arrived on snowmobiles. "Arrest him for criminal negligence, physical assault, and severe labor violations." The manager fell to his knees in the snow, sobbing uncontrollably and begging for mercy. He clawed at Edward's boots, screaming that he was just trying to protect the hotel's reputation. He cried that he had a family, that he was just following strict corporate protocol, but nobody listened to his pathetic, desperate lies. The wealthy guests, who had finally been evacuated from the dark lobby, watched in pure disgust. They saw the cowardly monster hiding behind the expensive suit. He was dragged away in heavy steel handcuffs, crying like a child, utterly humiliated and completely stripped of his power. He would spend the next day facing the harsh reality of the laws he broke. But the story didn't end there for the real hero. Sincere, brave love always blooms into the most radiant, beautiful pearls. Comment that exact phrase again to celebrate this beautiful victory of the human spirit. I believe the warmth of human kindness, regardless of poverty, is always the lighthouse that saves lonely souls in the storm. Edward didn't just casually thank Mary and walk away. He offered her an exclusive, multi-million-dollar contract for her father's biothermal weaving patent. He immediately flew Mary's dying father on a private medical jet to the best pulmonary hospital in the country. Within a few short months, the old miner was breathing easily again, sitting comfortably by a warm fireplace. Edward didn't stop there. He completely bought out the entire luxury resort chain. He stripped the greedy, negligent investors of all their shares. He transferred the entire property into a newly formed national charity trust, and he officially named Mary as the supreme director of the entire facility. The hotel was completely transformed into a massive state-of-the-art rescue and rehabilitation center for the homeless and the disabled. Mary didn't have to hide in a freezing, leaky attic ever again. She walked through the grand, brightly lit halls, deeply respected and loved by everyone she met. And the most beautiful part of the entire ordeal, Edward's little girl, who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 painful years, finally found her voice. The very first word she whispered was when she held Mary's scarred hand by the roaring fireplace. She looked up at the brave woman who had saved her life and simply said, "Thank you." When we offer our simple, honest warmth to others in their darkest, coldest nights, the universe will always reward us with the sweetest, most complete crown of happiness. Hit that subscribe button right now to keep the fire of humanity burning bright in your own life.